welcome to the first official episode of the Life's Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Quinn Jackson. I got the Browns beanie on. It's NFL Sunday. The college football playoffs were yesterday and that Friday. I'm going to dive into the playoffs and break it down for y'all. I'm excited for this episode. I'm excited to share it with you guys. If you're not new to the podcast and you might be confused as to why I'm calling this the first episode, well, it's because those previous episodes, which are still up on my YouTube channel and the official Spotify channel, those episodes were precursors to this to get me ready and excited and hyped up for this episode. I appreciate everyone that's seen those videos and have given me feedback on those videos. They are still up. For the newer viewers, they will still be up for you guys to watch. But let's get into it. I'm excited. I hope you guys are excited. And as always, the game never ends with the Life's Playbook podcast. Let's dive into the college football playoffs that were Friday and last Saturday. We're going to start with Friday's game, was Notre Dame and Indiana. I picked Notre Dame to absolutely destroy Indiana, to which they did not disappoint. Notre Dame absolutely dismantles Indiana 27-17. Do not let the score deceive you. Notre Dame absolutely dominated Indiana. Indiana stood no chance. I thought Indiana shouldn't have even been in it in the first place. I knew they were not the team to be in the college football playoffs, especially when you look at the strength of schedule and who they faced. The real only competition that they played, which was Notre Dame and Ohio State, they got blown out in both games. So I think I thought it was only fitting to pick Notre Dame over Indiana, and it was a good pick. Notre Dame moves on to play Georgia in the quarterfinals on New Year's Day in the All-State Sugar Bowl. Going a little deeper into that game, I watched the game up until about the third quarter. Notre Dame, their defense was amazing. Jeremiah Love and the offense, they were cooking with hot oil. Indiana, that was just they shouldn't have even been on the same field as Notre Dame. I mean, it was that bad. I mean, you talk about strength of schedule matters. Well, this game kind of showed that it does, and I'm going to dive a little deeper into that after I go through all the games and break down my thoughts on all the games, because that leads into one of the takeaways that I personally got from watching the first round. There were some problems, don't get me wrong, but an even bigger problem was letting Indiana into the playoffs, and it shows that they did not belong. They get manhandled 17-27. Good job, Notre Dame, keeping my prediction true so far. Good luck against Georgia. I think that'll be a good game. Georgia won't be with Carson Beck will not be playing that game, but again, in my previous prediction video, I said it didn't matter who Georgia rolls with at the helm. I think they're still going to beat Notre Dame, but upon hearing that it's confirmed that Carson Beck's not going to be playing, I think it's going to be a slightly tougher game than most people will anticipate, but it's still going to be a good game. It's not going to be a blowout. They play on New Year's Day, the All-State Sugar Bowl, Notre Dame, Georgia. Moving on to Saturday's game, starting from the top, the big noon kickoff game was Penn State, number 6, taking on number 11 SMU. SMU, they barely got in over Alabama over that sketchy loss to Clemson, 31-34. They played behind against Clemson in that game, and they played behind again against Penn State, and they got the doors blown off them by Penn State, of all schools. Penn State blew the doors off of SMU, 38-10. I didn't think it was going to be that high of a game because it was a big stage. James Franklin is known to fold on the big stage, but I guess SMU also couldn't handle the big stage. They weren't prepared for the playoffs. And I know a lot of Bama fans right now were sitting on the couch and watching this game thinking, this is the team that the committee decided to put in over us. And I gotta agree with Bama on that part, but at the same time, you got to look at it. Bama, you lost to a 6-5 Oklahoma school, and you lost to Vandy. If you don't lose those two games, you would have easily cleared SMU in the committee's minds to make it in the playoffs. If you just don't lose those two games, you would have easily made it in over SMU. So at the same time, Bama, I understand that SMU they didn't really put on a show like we were expecting them to, but at the same time, you also got to do your job if you even want to be in the playoffs. You got to do your job and not lose to Vandy in Oklahoma, knowing that those two games are going to come back to haunt your chances of going into the playoffs. But anyways, Penn State blows the doors off of SMU. SMU shouldn't have even been on the field. It was that bad. I mean, their quarterback, Jennings, threw 3 interceptions in the first half, 2 pick sixes in the first half. Penn State's offense, they didn't really have to do anything. I mean, it was SMU was just that abysmal to watch. The defense for Penn State just quite literally carried Penn State into the Verbo Fiesta Bowl, where they will now face Boise State on New Year's Eve. That's the first game to kick off the quarterfinals. But Penn State, I picked them to beat SMU, oddly enough, considering I'm an Ohio guy. But I trusted James Franklin to get the job done in the playoffs, and he did not disappoint. But Penn State blows the doors off of SMU. Good season for Indiana and SMU. Objectively, good seasons. I mean, nobody thought Indiana was going to be in the playoffs, and nobody thought SMU was going to be in the playoffs. But they proved doubters wrong. Great season for both schools, nonetheless. But they just shouldn't have even been on the field with the teams that they played, and it shows. But good job, Penn State and Notre Dame. They get the job done. Now, moving on to the 4 o'clock game, Texas and Clemson. Now, the score was 38-24. I know what you're thinking. That's another blowout game, but if you sat down and watched the game, which I know both fans from both schools did, and I watched the game. It really wasn't as big of a blowout as the score says. Clemson jumped on Texas rather early. They were the first ones to score, and then they just kind of cruised. And that gave Texas a chance to come back and dominate. That run game for Texas just dominated Clemson. Clemson came into that stadium, into Texas's home field, and thought they were just gonna breeze right through. They thought they were the same old Clemson from all the years past that dominate, and that just wasn't the case. Beats Clemson at their own game that Clemson tried to run on them. Texas said, screw that. We're the champs at running the football. We're going to win this game by beating you on the ground, and they did just that. It was a closer game, don't get me wrong, and at one point it was 31-24. Clemson had a chance to tie the game, but they decided, I think this was in the third quarter, they decided to run the ball. I think this was towards the end of the third quarter. They decided to run the ball when they're on the goal line, and Texas's defense came up. Their defensive line came up big and stopped them. So it was a closer game, I'd say, compared to the other two that I broke down earlier. Quinn Ewers had a good game. He had 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Not bad. I said in my previous prediction video that if Quinn Ewers or whoever was at the helm at quarterback gets hot, Texas is going to light teams up, and that's exactly what they did. They beat Clemson. That run game quite literally ran Clemson out of the building, and Texas moves on to face Arizona State in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl on New Year's Day. Good season for Clemson. They just couldn't get the job done. They lost at their own game. That is running the ball. Texas just does everything better. They especially run the ball. There was no chance that Clemson was going to walk into Texas's home field and run all over them. Not with that defense. Not with that defensive line. That defense is really the highlight of Texas's team. They're the heart and soul of Texas's team. Not taking anything away from the offense, because the offense has stars too, but the defense is where it's at for Texas, and they showed up that game. They got the job done. 38-24. One of the closer games again. That brings us to the last and final game of that night. It's Ohio State number 8 taking on Tennessee. Before I dive into that game, you got to understand if you're an outsider from Tennessee or Ohio State, you got to understand the context leading up to this game, because this was a must-win game for Ohio State, in my opinion, because there were a lot of things on the line. There were jobs on the line, senior seasons on the line. That was the last game at the shoe. All right, they have to go. They beat Tennessee. They manhandled Tennessee 42-17. They move on to the Rose Bowl to play Oregon for that well-deserved rematch from in the regular season. Ohio State only lost that game by 1 point. But there were a lot of things on the line. There were a lot of jobs at stake, a lot of senior seasons on the line. This could have, if Ryan Day lost this game, coming off that Michigan loss, if Ryan Day also lost this game, he probably would have been fired on the spot. He would not have been the coach for Ohio State after this year. But he understood the stakes. He understood the magnitude of this game. Chip Kelly also understood the stakes and the magnitude of this game, and they put together a show-stopping game plan for Tennessee. Tennessee scored a late garbage time touchdown to make the score a little bit more respectable for them, but it was just all Ohio State. That defense showed up big. 4 sacks for the Ohio State defense. 4 sacks for that Ohio State defense. Jeremiah Smith had 2 touchdowns, 103 yards, and he finally got over the 1,000-yard mark as a true freshman. That kid is phenomenal. If Ohio State continues to feed him the ball, we're going to make a deep playoff run. The run game was there, despite everybody saying that Tennessee's got this. They've got this defensive line identical to Michigan, or they're going to run all these schemes identical to what Michigan did. Ohio State lit that defensive line up on their run game, and they manhandled Tennessee, and they, moving forward, play Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Well deserved win for Ohio State, must-win game. Tennessee, good season, just wasn't enough, though, to beat Ohio State. But, yet again, Clemson, Tennessee, SMU, and Indiana, good seasons objectively. Just some teams shouldn't have really been on the field those games. Some teams didn't show up, and it showed on the field. Which brings me to my takeaways for this game and this week. There were really two major takeaways that I got from the first round of the college football playoffs. 2 takeaways. The first being the blowout games. Now, objectively, you look at the scores and they all seem to be blowouts, but again, the Texas-Clemson game was probably the closest out of the 4. But, you look at teams like Indiana and SMU, more specifically those 2 teams, because they were the ones that really got blown out. I think this shows a looming long-term problem with having a 12-team playoff. I understand that it gives the lesser teams an incentive. It gives the lesser teams an increased chance of making the playoffs. Personally, I think a 12-team playoff is great because you get more diversity in teams. It's not like in the 4-team playoffs, you kind of saw the same teams every year. I like the diversity of it. You get to see teams that you've never seen before in the playoffs, like Boise State. Who would have thought Boise State would have made the playoffs? Who would have thought SMU or Indiana or Arizona State would have made the playoffs? You know what I'm saying? So I like the diversity aspect of having the 12-team playoffs. I think personally they should keep it, but it is no secret that if they continue to keep the 12-team format, that expect your first rounds to look like that. Blowout games, essentially. Some teams getting in over others, like, again, SMU getting in over Bama. I understand that part of it, but at the same time, again, Bama, you can't lose 3 games. Can't lose 3 games. You got to beat a 6-5 Oklahoma. Can't lose to Vandy. Same thing with South Carolina. You can't lose 3 games. LSU can't lose 3 games. You got to win the games that matter. The games that ultimately are going to decide your playoff hopes. You got to win those. in order to get a shot at the 12-team playoffs. But again, I like the diversity aspect of the playoffs, but these blowouts are probably going to be a looming long-term problem for the 12-team playoffs because, some teams were just flat out better than others. Some teams are going to be flat out better on paper than others, and it's going to show on the field. That was the first major takeaway that I got from this week is the imbalance between matchups. The second takeaway I got from this week was strength of schedule does matter. I said this earlier that I would dive into strength of schedule, and I think it needs to be brought up because it does matter. It's ultimately the reason why SMU got in over Alabama. But again, Alabama got to win them games. Got to win those games to make the playoffs. But strength of schedule does matter to an extent. You look at teams like SMU. I mean, who did they really face? Indiana. Who did they really face? The two toughest teams that Indiana faced were Ohio State and Notre Dame, and we just saw what happened Friday against Notre Dame, and we saw what happened the second to last week of the regular season against Ohio State. It did not end well at all for Indiana. Strength of schedule does matter. I don't think it should ultimately be the deciding factor as to whether a team gets in over another team, because then you're going to have situations like South Carolina and you're going to have situations like Bama, teams that have had harder schedules than, say, schools like SMU and Indiana, and missing out, and you're going to have angry fan bases from those schools. But again, those schools got to do their job. They got to do their part and win. It's just that simple. You got to win. But I don't think strength of schedule should be the ultimate reason why some teams are snubbed out of the playoffs over others. I think if the committee took into account strength of schedule, you probably wouldn't have certain teams on here. The first round would probably be a little more entertaining because let's be honest, outside of really the Texas Clemson game, all the other games were blowouts, complete blowouts. And us as college football fans, we don't want to watch blowouts. We want to see an exciting playoffs. We want to see teams of equal skill battling it out on the field to get to that national championship. We don't want to see a cupcake run all the way to the national championship. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see another TCU Georgia situation. If y'all don't remember the TCU Georgia situation, Georgia pretty much blew out TCU in the national championship 2 years ago. We don't want to see that. We want to see teams of equal caliber. We want to see teams of equal play go up against each other, and we want to see an exciting first round. This first round really wasn't that good. I think a lot of fans know that. I think the committee, after watching this week, know that. Um, I think this round can help in the long run if the committee continues to keep the 12-team playoff format, which I think they will. I think they should learn from this round, and this round can help with their decision making moving forward as to who gets in and who doesn't. Moving forward to the quarterfinals, I think that's going to be a little more exciting. I think it's going to be a little more interesting now that you don't have SMU and Clemson and Indiana in there anymore. It's now nailed down to the teams that actually are of similar caliber. I think really the only blowout game in the quarterfinals that I think is Arizona State and Texas. I mean, I think Texas could roll Arizona State just like they kind of rolled Clemson. I think they could roll Arizona State because let's be honest, who does Arizona State have that's going to handle Quinn Ewers or Isaiah Bond or the other amazing wideout receivers that they have and the run game that they have? Who's going to stop? How are they going to handle the Texas defense, which is, again, been a highlight for Texas time and time again? Cam Skattebo is only one guy, and he's arguably the second best running back in this playoffs. Gentry's number one for obvious reasons. I mean, he was a Heisman finalist, but outside of him, who does Arizona State have offensively that's gonna make that leap? help Arizona State beat Texas. I don't see that happening. So I think that really could be the only blowout game in the quarterfinals. Ohio State, Oregon. Again, that's going to be a great game, especially considering what happened and what we saw in the preseason, the regular season, with Ohio State only losing that game by one. Me being an Ohio guy, I personally think we can get the job done here and we can beat Oregon. We are more than capable. As shown against Tennessee, we are more than capable of winning that game, and I think we get the job done. I think it's going to be a great game. It's going to be a close game again. It might come down to a walk-off field goal, but that's going to be a much more exciting game. I think fans know it from both schools. Outsiders know it. It's going to be a great game. Penn State, Boise State. I personally, I still think Boise State can get the job done despite having a weaker supporting cast as opposed to Penn State. Penn State, they have Tyler Warren, great tight end, arguably a first rounder. Abdul Carter leading that defense. They shut out SMU, but I think Boise State, if that supporting cast steps up, they that coach at Boise State, he knows Penn State has a good defense. He knows that Penn State they can roll on offense. I think that supporting cast for Boise State steps up in the playoffs, and Boise State can get the job done. So I'm rolling with Boise State to beat Penn State. And Georgia Notre Dame, that could be a good game. I think it's, again, as I said earlier, it's going to be a lot closer than most people anticipate it's going to be. Despite Carson Beck being out, I think it's going to be a lot closer because of that. But I still think Georgia can pull it off. But I think the quarterfinals will be a much more entertaining watch than the first round because, again, all these teams are relative to each other. They all pretty much have the same caliber to each other. They're all pretty much the same. There's not really a team that's better than the other besides maybe Georgia over Notre Dame and Texas being objectively better than Arizona State, but only time will tell. Only those games will tell. The quarterfinals kicks off on New Year's Eve with Boise State taking on Penn State. So I will be watching all the games, and I hope you watch all the games and see what I see. But, I think it could be a much more entertaining watch. But this first round, those were my two takeaways from the first round. Moving forward, again, I think this first round could be a great format in decision making moving forward in the 12-team playoff for the committee, so they can try to minimize having these lesser teams going up against more stacked teams, so we can avoid these blowouts. Because, again, us as college football fans, we don't want to watch SMU get blown out. I was expecting that game. I wasn't even expecting a 38-10 type of game. I was expecting like a closer, lower scoring game, like a 24-20 type of game. But that just wasn't the point. That just didn't happen. We don't want to watch. We don't want to watch that. We want to watch an exciting playoff, and I still think it can be exciting. Again, I think the quarterfinals can be better than the first round. I see teams in the quarterfinals that are of equal caliber, and really the only team that I see that's in the quarterfinals that objectively could blow out their opponent is Texas. Because Texas, they have the coach. They're well coached. Great defense. Amazing offense. They could honestly be the only blowout game in that quarterfinals. Not to take anything away from Arizona State because they're going to try, but I don't think they can keep up with Texas. But that's besides the point. The point is, as a college football fan myself, and I'm sure many of you don't want to blowouts, and we don't want to see teams that probably would have made the first round more interesting. We don't want to see those teams left out just because SMU had an easier strength of schedule and they went 11-2 and Bama went 9-3. But again, to those schools that didn't make it, you got to win those big games. You got to win those games that are going to matter. You got to win those games that are going to decide whether you get in the playoffs or not. But again, those are arguments to be made for another day. I'm not a fan of Bama. I'm not a fan of Ole Miss or or South Carolina, but I understand where their fan base is coming from. What I understand their, especially Bama's frustration with being left out. I understand where they're coming from, but again, you got to win those big games. 9-3 team's not going to get in over an 11-2 team. Not that's just not going to fly. You got to win those games. But that was the first round. That was the college football playoffs that started on Friday. So far, my predictions personally are they're true. All the teams that I had winning won, and hopefully the quarterfinals, my predictions stay true. That was first round of the college football playoffs. I'm excited to keep watching. I think it can get real interesting down the road to the semifinals and down the road to the national championship. More specifically, talking about the Ohio State Tennessee game, because I'm an Ohio guy. I'm glad that we were able to bounce back from that Michigan game. It didn't haunt us. Ryan Day didn't let it haunt him, and him and Chip Kelly came up with a great plan to destroy Tennessee, and that's exactly what happened. I'm glad we won. To the Ohio State fans, it's kind of a win-loss scenario for Ohio State if you look at the team personally, because again, we know Ryan Day, he's lost these games to Michigan, but he has the capacity to lead us to a national championship. So it's like at the same it's like it's a win-lose situation essentially. But, you know, Ryan Day, he can get it done when it matters. The players love him, the seniors love him, the fans, despite the history with Michigan, we still trust him to lead us to a national championship. I think we can we can get over the hump against Oregon come New Year's Day, and we could be facing Texas. We could be facing Texas. I'll say it right now. I think Ohio State Texas could be the Goodyear Cotton Bowl semifinal game, because I trust Texas enough to beat Arizona State, and I trust Ohio State to finally get over that hump and beat Oregon. Not to take anything away from Oregon, because they're a great team, and they've made the playoffs before, and they've made a national championship before. They haven't won one, but they have the experience to win one. They have the offense to win one. They have the defense to win one. I just think that if the coaches review the mistakes made from previous games, especially the Michigan game, and they take this Tennessee game into account, and we take the first meeting of Ohio State and Oregon into account, I think we can get over that hump, beat Oregon. But that's just my opinion. Again, there are arguments to be made about the 12 format. There are arguments to be made about the snubbing of Alabama not getting in over SMU and whatnot, and strength of schedule should be a deciding factor. It should not be. But at the end of the day, if we as college football fans want to see an exciting first round, it starts with the committee. It starts with them actually taking into account that, well, yeah, Indiana, they ran through everybody that they played, but the two toughest teams that they played, it's on paper, they got blown out. But those there are arguments for other those are arguments for other days, discussions for other episodes. Which reminds me, going into Thursday, I know I didn't talk about it today, but it is NFL Sunday. So be on the lookout Thursday for episode 2 of the podcast. That episode, I will break down and recap all the NFL games from today, as well as give you my predictions for next week's NFL slate and that Thursday night game. Yeah, I'm excited for episode 2 of the podcast, and I'm excited to share this episode with you guys. It's been a long time coming. I'm excited to be a host of this podcast, and I'm excited to give you guys a quality experience, quality episodes, and give you guys my opinions on, things like the college football playoffs and the NFL and the NBA. And best believe there will be talk about the NBA more and the NFL more. But today's episode, I really wanted to break down the college football playoffs and what I thought, how those games went, and the 2 takeaways that I got from the first round. But yeah, the previous episodes that I've made, they are still up. They are still on the official YouTube page and the official Spotify page. So be sure to check those out. Make sure to like and subscribe. As always, I want this podcast to grow and get better and better, and it will get better and better. I'll continue to update the podcast and let you guys know what's going on. It'll continue to look better, be better, um, and just overall be a good experience for you guys. But this was the first official episode of the Life's Playbook podcast. I will catch you guys Thursday for episode 2. Again, breaking down this week's slate of NFL games, giving my predictions for that Thursday night game, and giving my predictions overall on the NFL playoffs, who I think will be in and who I think won't be in. But yeah, this was the first episode of the Life's Playbook podcast. As always, the game never ends here at the Life's Playbook podcast. I will see you guys Thursday. Till then, stay tuned.